Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paul Hutchinson, and I'm delighted that you've found us, and I hope that you find the next hour or so entertaining and informative about the world of football. What do we have for you this time round? First couple of segments are going to be about actual live football. We're going to preview some of the games that are going to be happening in the Bundesliga that starts up again on Saturday. So we'll have a little bit of a deep dive into what we can maybe expect from those games. Very excited about that. In the next two segments after that, we'll take a look at what's happening around the world of football, have a look at some of the news that's coming out of the various different leagues around the world. In the penultimate part of our podcast, we're going to look at the transfer market and see what rumours are knocking about where various different players are going to end up. At the end of all of that, we are going to be continuing what I'm calling Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. And this week we're going to have the Hand of God game against England versus Argentina. And then we're also going to look at the 1950 World Cup game between England and the USA. So, I think that's going to be absolutely plenty. We'd love for you to get involved. The best way to do that is via our social media outlets. At GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram. We'd love to hear your comments about anything that is raised during this podcast, and also if there is anything that you would like for us to raise as well. We want this to be a pretty interactive situation around here. So, I think with that, we'll move straight on to our first part, which is all about live football. I have to say that it's actually pretty difficult doing a podcast when there's no actual live football, so I am delighted that we've got some games left. The first league in Europe to emerge from the lockdown after the coronavirus is Bundesliga. There are 11 games left, and previously on Bundesliga, we left it with all the teams playing 25 games, which means there are 11 games left in an 18-team league. Bayern Munich are top right now on 55 points, with Borussia Dortmund 4 points behind them on 51. RB Leipzig, they're on 50 points, just 1 point behind Borussia Dortmund, with Borussia Mönchengladbach only they're on 49 points. Bayer Leverkusen on 47 points, and in 6th, Schalke, they're on 37 points. So there's a little bit of a gap between 5th and 6th, but there are only 6 points between the top 4 teams, which are the Champions League positions, only 2 points from there, Bayer Leverkusen. So it's all really nicely poised, and so it was actually really disappointing when this league had to take its little hiatus for all the coronavirus precautions. You might very well be interested in looking at some live soccer, but don't really know too much about the Bundesliga, and maybe even looking to adopt a team. You may be very interested to know as well that there are quite a few young American players that are involved in the Bundesliga week in, week out. And before we kind of get into the before we get into the previewing of all of the different games this weekend, I thought it might be nice to just have a quick précis of the players who are plying their trade in Germany that come from the USA and are involved in the US national team. Probably the most prominent at the moment is Weston McKennie. He plays at Schalke, and he's getting a really regular game right now in the centre of midfield. Fella's only 21. He's made 16 starts this year, and the only reason he's not played in all games is that he's been out injured. David Wagner, his head coach, who used to be at Huddersfield Town a couple of years back, he really rates him, and he's been one of the absolute mainstays of Schalke's midfield this time round. So he can play basically anywhere across midfield. He's even been pressed into playing up front every now and again. So he's very highly thought of. So Schalke may very well be one of the teams that you think, okay, that might be interesting to maybe start supporting them. There is other options too. Gio Reyna, who is the son of Claudio Reyna, who used to play at Manchester City and Sunderland in the Premier League, like around sort of the 90s, maybe early 2000s. His son is at Borussia Dortmund. He's a midfielder, and he's been getting more game time. He played in the Champions League in the knockout stages, coming on as a sub. Fella's only 17 years old, and he's getting more and more opportunities. So, if this weekend you end up watching the Borussia Dortmund game, he's more likely to come on as a substitute. So look out for him there. Other options, we've got Tyler Adams. He's at RB Leipzig. He's only 21 years old. He's made like a handful of starts. Again, a very fledgling career in the Bundesliga. It's been fairly unfortunate for him because he was getting a game and then got an injury. But because Leipzig were doing so well, the manager there was loath to mess around with that formula, and so found his opportunities hard to come by, shall we say. Pretty well regarded at RB Leipzig. The goalkeeper for the US national team, it feels like it's decided upon really now, and Zach Steffen has played in most of the significant games for the US men's national team. He's actually on loan from Manchester City right now and playing at Fortuna Dusseldorf, and he's doing really well. Unfortunately, the nature of how Dusseldorf are doing right now, it means that he's actually making a lot of saves, so he's definitely getting his practice in. He's only 25, and in terms of a goalkeeper, that's no particular age really. He's been trusted to do a really good job for Dusseldorf since he's been brought in from Manchester City. At Werder Bremen, you've got Josh Sargent. He's a striker, and he has been given plenty of caps for the men's national team. Just recently, he's played in 18 games, mostly coming on as sub probably, but again, only aged 20, so there's plenty of time for his game to develop. Werder Bremen might be an option for you if you're looking for a team to support that's got some US contingent in there. John Brooks, he plays at Wolfsburg. He's a centre-back. He's pretty well experienced these days now, and he's been at a World Cup for the US, a surprise inclusion by Klinsmann the last time the US qualified for that. So he's pretty well established there. He's played 16 games this year for Wolfsburg. Got Fabian Johnson that you might know from. He's a winger. Plays at Borussia Mönchengladbach, who are doing pretty well this year. He's found it difficult really to get back into that team, as they're doing pretty well as well. Timothy Chandler, he's at Eintracht Frankfurt. Middling season. There's Alfred Morales at Fortuna Dusseldorf. And there are plenty of other ones. We've run out of time a little bit. So there you go. There's some options. There are plenty of US men's national team members that are plying their trade in the Bundesliga. After we come back, we will look at some of the games that you'll be able to see live in the US this coming weekend. You are listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Alright, welcome back. In the first part of our podcast, we looked at some of the US men's national team members that are in the Bundesliga, hopefully in an aid maybe to pick a team if you're excited about watching some live soccer this weekend and maybe want to root for a team. Hopefully that might have given you a little bit of an idea about who you'd like to support. What we're going to do now is take a little bit of a deep dive into each one of the games that will be shown live somehow in the US. There's a lot of games. There's going to be 6 in total over 3 days, Saturday through Monday. We start with probably the biggest game. It's between Borussia Dortmund and Schalke. It's going to start on Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. It's the Ruhr region derby, the Rivera derby. I'm assured that's how it's pronounced. It's a big game. This is going to be 2nd versus 6th. It's a tight game. In the last 8 games between these two teams, Borussia Dortmund actually haven't done all that well. They've only won once, having drawn 5 of those and lost 2. So they've got somewhat of a little bit of a hex over them, have Schalke. Dortmund come into this is super strange really. The idea of form coming into this. I might just totally have dissipated. It's not even worth considering, I don't know, because who knows what the standard is going to be and where players are at in terms of fitness. And Dortmund actually came into this game having won 7 of their last 8. And so they were coming into this on pretty hot form. And it did feel like both Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund were getting into that kind of final run-in form that things were clicking and looking good. But who knows? Before the break, Dortmund had won 4 Bundesliga games in a row, and that had been the first time all season that they had done that. Haaland and Sancho, they have scored more goals combined than the entire Schalke team have in the entirety of the calendar year 2020. Between them, they have scored 14 goals, whereas Schalke have only managed 4 in that time. However, it's a local derby, and as they say, when you talk about local derbies, form goes out of the window, and it'll be really interesting. Dortmund actually have a few issues in midfield, where Witsel and Emre Can have both picked up injuries coming back to training, which must be disappointing for them. And as we've mentioned before, maybe Gio Reyna might benefit from that, maybe coming on as sub at some point during the game. As for Schalke, they are getting some injuries back, with Sane, one of their central defenders, looking the most likely to be available for them. Yeah, as we mentioned in the previous section, Weston McKennie, he is the driving force in that midfield, and so I expect him to play as well. So, really looking forward to that game. Probably the pick of the fixtures this week. I suspect that Borussia Dortmund in their title chase would not have picked this game as the first game back, because not only is it a local derby, but they are also doing well in the league too. So, really looking forward to that. The next game I want to focus on is the game between RB Leipzig and Freiburg. That's also at 6:30 Pacific time. That's going to be shown on VUDN. So if you have access to that, I think that's going to be in the Spanish language. Leipzig are currently in 3rd. They were on a real roll, having just beaten Tottenham Hotspur in the Champions League. They were absolutely flying. They had made their first ever quarter-final in the Champions League. As for Freiburg, well, they started off okay in terms of the season, and they were up there challenging. They've kind of slipped down since then, but they will also be kind of who knows? That's what I keep coming back to. Form is just non-existent at this point. Cohesion of passing and fitness, who knows what's going to happen. Leipzig's form before the break wasn't actually all that great, to be honest. They'd only won 2 of the previous 7. They were very much in the driving seat. Bayern Munich pegged back a 4-point lead during that time as well. So now they're 5 points behind. They might have seen the break as somewhat of a taking stock moment. They'll absolutely be delighted to get going and maybe have looked into some of the things that they weren't doing right. Kanate, he's returned to full fitness. I think a lot of teams will have seen this as an opportunity to get players back on the field. A few players suspended as well, and Ampadu, he's got a back problem, which may well see him out. Schalke, just before the break, ended a 3-match winless run to beat Union Berlin 3-1 last time out. They expect Gunter to overcome a thigh strain. Basically, are going to be at full strength this match against Leipzig. And the last game at this time on this coming Saturday at 6:30 a.m. Pacific time is going to be Augsburg versus Wolfsburg. Augsburg, they're on the cusp of kind of relegation. They've just had a bit of a horrendous run just before the break, having lost 4 of the last 5 games. And Wolfsburg, they're looking to push into maybe the UEFA places for European competitions next year. So there's plenty riding on this game. And Wolfsburg really do enjoy playing against Augsburg. In fact, they recorded their greatest ever win on the final day of the season against Augsburg when they beat them 8-1. They like playing them, and in fact Augsburg haven't beaten Wolfsburg in this fixture in their last 4 meetings. So they'll be looking to try and sort that out. And Wolfsburg, they'd actually only won 2 games in 12 matches, but just before the break, they put a string of matches together where they were unbeaten in 6. So, again, they'll feel that things have been turning around a little bit. Yeah, the last time round Augsburg, they were beaten by Bayern Munich 2-0. That was a tight game. They kept it quite tight in that one, if I remember correctly. But yeah, they are 5 consecutive league games without a win. That cost Martin Schmidt his job as head coach. Since then, he's been replaced by the former Bayer Leverkusen coach, Herrlich, and this will be the first match that he gets to look after them. So, yeah, they're in the relegation mix right now. So they have made that change in order to make sure that they don't get more embroiled in all of that. Wolfsburg, they're pretty confident. They're scoring goals. I would expect for this game to be a Wolfsburg win, but not by a great deal. But again, everything's up in the air. Everything. Just, who knows? It's impossible to say. Alright, let's take a quick break there. When we come back, we'll look at the games that are going to be played on Sunday and Monday in the Bundesliga. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back. In the last section, we looked at the early games that are going to be played in the Bundesliga, the 6:30 games, and we're going to continue now into the game that's being played at 9:30am on Saturday. Again, this is going to be on Fox Sports. It's going to be Eintracht Frankfurt versus Borussia Mönchengladbach, which is always fun to say. And Borussia Mönchengladbach are in decent shape too. They are currently in 4th and looking to consolidate that position. Frankfurt, however, they're kind of hovering above the relegation zone. They probably, they feel like they could do with a few points just to feel a little bit better about themselves and maybe even push for European places. They do have an actual pretty decent record at home against the top clubs. They've actually pretty appalling away from home, but they've got 21 points at home and they've taken 10 from 12 games against the current top 4. They'll probably go into this feeling pretty confident of their home form. Borussia Mönchengladbach have pretty much been getting on with it. Their success has been born from their pretty stringent defence, and they are currently the 3rd best in terms of goals. They too will feel pretty confident going away from home, doing alright, and will be going for their 7th win. As for Frankfurt, their really good start to the calendar year of 2020 has sort of dissipated slightly since then. They earned 10 points from their first 4 games in the Bundesliga this year. They've been having a few kind of issues up front. It's probably going to be the Portuguese player Placencia that will run the line for Frankfurt. I think Borussia Mönchengladbach will be looking to consolidate their 4th place here with a pretty solid win against Eintracht. On Sunday at 6:30am Pacific time, there's the game between Cologne and Mainz. Cologne would have been 4th had just the games from the second half of the season be counted. So they're actually in pretty decent form right now. And have won 5 of their last 6 Bundesliga home games. So, and that only loss was to Bayern Munich. So they're going to be feeling pretty confident. Mainz, however, they've lost all 8 of the games where they've conceded the first goal. So clearly heads go down once they've conceded first time. It's an interesting one in terms of, for Cologne, they've got a 14-point gap now between them and relegation, so they're really looking to maybe close the 5-point gap to the European places. They're expecting Katabach to overcome an ankle injury to start at left back, whereas Mainz, they've got real problems with their goalkeeper in the last game. Their first choice keeper's Zentner. He was ruled out for the rest of the season because of a cruciate ligament injury, which meant that the person that he had replaced as first choice, Muller, he's going to be reinstated for the rest of the campaign. It could be seen as a little bit of a mid-table kind of who cares. Mainz are still just hovering over those relegation places, so they'll really want to try and distance themselves from all of that. It should be a good game. Yeah, that's at 6:30 on Sunday. Following that game on Sunday at 9am, Union Berlin host Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich flying right now. Yeah, they're unbeaten in 15 competitive games, 11 of which are in the Bundesliga. They really are putting a bit of a run together. And they currently have the largest league that they've had at the top of the Bundesliga all season. One of the reasons that they are right up there is the form of Gnabry. He's scored 7 goals in his last 10 Bundesliga appearances. He's got 11 all told, with Lewandowski, who has been just an absolute animal up front for them. He's got 25 goals. I mean, there was a point at which, at the start of the season, that he went several games consecutively scoring goals. He just could not miss the fella. So yeah, they've got the work cut out, have Union Berlin. And Yeah, their coach, Fischer, he's actually lost all 3 competitive meetings that he's ever had with Bayern Munich, one of which was when he was in charge of Zurich in the Champions League. Had a very successful season so far themselves. I mean, come up for the first time in the Bundesliga last year. They've very much been a surprise package. They've got 30 points right now, which very healthy return at this point of the season. They're probably looking actually more towards European places than they are a relegation fight, which is, as a newly promoted team, really all you can ask for, I suppose. Coming into this game, though, their striker, Trimmel, he's kind of a little bit of a doubt with a knee injury. Union Berlin were actually beaten 2-1 in the return fixture earlier this season. So they'll see this very much as a bonus fixture as well. You know, if they get something out of this, that's just going to be a bonus. They probably won't earmark a game against Bayern Munich as something that they'll get points from. But it's always fun. I've been there as a Bolton fan where you're newly promoted and you've got all these big teams coming to see you. It's always exciting. So 2 decent teams, must be fairly confident. And that's one to look forward to. The final game that's going to be shown live over here from the Bundesliga is on Monday. That starts at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, and that's between Werder Bremen and Bayer Leverkusen. Werder Bremen come into this in pretty appalling form. They are second from bottom. They are 4 points away from safety, and they have lost the last 6 home games in a row. And they're not even scoring either. They've failed to score in 5 of those defeats too. So, and they are vying for a pretty unwanted record in that regard. There's only 3 teams that have experienced longer runs at home: Hansa Rostock, Tasmania Berlin in 65-66. Never even heard of them, and Hanover in 2015, 2016 with 7 home defeats. So, and the bad news for them, for Werder Bremen, was that all of those teams were relegated. And if they go 6 home games without scoring in a row, that's another unwanted record that they would take from both Freiburg and Stuttgart. So they really do need to shape. On the other hand, Bayer Leverkusen are actually loving life right now. They went through against Rangers in the UEFA Cup. Yeah, their goal scorer, Havertz, he's banging them in from all angles. And in a role perhaps that he's not familiar with particularly, but he's playing up front right now. They'll be missing Paulinho, formerly of Spurs, who has himself been scoring goals, and did so in the reverse fixture last time out. He's not expected to play this weekend. Werder Bremen really need some wins, looking in pretty ropey form. And Bayer Leverkusen, although they're playing away from home, I expect to do well in this fixture here. There you have it. There are 6 games going to be available to people watching in the US at GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram, with who you're going to be supporting, what you expect from your teams. Are you picking some team for the first time? We really want to hear about the decisions that you made and how you arrived at that in order to support a German team for the first time. That's at GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram for all of those bits of feedback regarding the Bundesliga. Usually wouldn't go into as much detail as that, but we are struggling for live football, so it's been nice to look into where the teams were at and then what to expect this weekend. It's been really nice to preview some football, I have to say. When we come back in the next section, we're going to have a look at the news throughout the soccer world in the various different leagues. You're listening to GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back. In the previous sections, we've looked at the prospect of the Bundesliga back this coming weekend, so that's been really fun to look ahead and dream of some actual live soccer. What I'm probably going to do now is put us straight back down to reality a little bit with how many of the other leagues are approaching what's going on and the prospect of those leagues starting up again. So we're going to start with the Premier League, which again I feel like is the bellwether for how things are going to proceed with this. There is so much money riding on the Premier League being finished. I read that the Premier League, even if they do start up the league again, because it is overrun, that they might very well owe TV companies a whole bunch of money, people saying upwards of like 300 million, even if they do play the games. The guidelines for how training should be observed being announced today. And I'm going to go through some of the major ones of those, that all of the equipment like corner flags have to be disinfected after each session, and that means even the playing surfaces. Heard that like spitting, that is fairly prevalent usually during games, is going to be disallowed as well. These training sessions are going to be restricted to 75 minutes, and the hope is that they're going to start doing these on Monday of next week. But of course there'll be ongoing observations of whether these are going to be upheld. And it says that there's going to be twice weekly testing. Now, I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, because I know that certainly in the UK, they're struggling for testing of the people on the front line. So quite where that testing is coming from, not quite sure. There's also going to be a daily pre-training questionnaire and a temperature check, which are some of the early indicators of whether you have that virus or not. They're going to insist upon, and in quotes, meticulous personal hygiene. And, I mentioned this last week, the use of PPE. Asked not to congregate in communal areas, which include, but are not limited to, medical rooms and gym areas. So, I've heard theories that there's not going to be any tackling during any of these sessions, and that people are asked to move their face away during any kind of close interaction on the playing field. I don't know how you train yourself to do that. I don't know. Players are not allowed to share transport to the ground, or to the training ground rather. The upkeep of the facility has to be maintained scrupulously. So there should be no group transport at all. It's understood as well that the PFA, which is the Professional Footballers Union, they have heard from quite a few players, and especially from those that have got like underlying health concerns like asthma and things like that, and from the BAME communities as well, those players that are from those backgrounds. The science seems to be that they are twice as likely to be at risk of the coronavirus. So they're expressing real concern about trying to get back to training and have the season continue. Danny Rose, the left back who plays now at Newcastle, formerly of Tottenham Hotspur, And in the current England squad as well, he was talking about this idea of it being a morale boost for the country, and he gave that pretty short shrift, in honesty. He said he's not that minded about morale at this point. He just wants to make sure that he stays healthy, and I think that's a view echoed by a fair few people as well, I think, including Raheem Sterling. So obviously the PFA are involved in all of these things. The Professional Footballers Association are in constant contact with all of these different health screening initiatives. And the government have to approve all of these sorts of different things too, in order for the next stage to be approved and a date for a possible comeback to be agreed upon. In other news as well, the chief of police in the Greater Manchester area, which includes where Manchester City and Manchester United play, he has expressed concerns about what he called tricky fixtures, because Liverpool are going to be in town pretty soon, playing Manchester City in what's probably not going to be a particularly... it's not going to decide too much, I don't think, but it's still a big game between the current holders of the title and the holders-elect. He said that would definitely, without any shadow of a doubt, attract crowds to the ground. Liverpool is 35 miles away from Manchester. It's not a great distance at all. And he said that there needs to be very, very careful thinking through. And he's dead right, really. So what's the timeline for all of this in England? On Thursday, which is when this podcast is due to be released, the Premier League and the Footballers Union are going to meet about the medical protocols and see whether they can agree on that. There's also going to be a meeting between the football authorities and the culture secretary from the government to see what the plan is and whether that can get approved. There is then a meeting the following Monday with all of the owners of the Premier League clubs, and that is also the day that they hope that training will resume in training grounds. There's quite a few big dates coming up in order to make sure that the stages will be observed. UEFA have set a deadline of May 25th for all of the leagues around Europe to have a plan finalised for restarting their seasons. Be that, yeah, we're going to continue and this is how we're doing it, or no, we've called it, that's this is how we're going about things. The government in the UK have said June 1st might be a possible date for elite sport to start happening. Sadiq Khan, who is the Mayor of London, he has said that there's going to be no sport before that date happening in London at all, with June 12th, the date that the Premier League are aiming to have the first fixture back. Whew! Alright, I mean, good luck with all of that. In some of the other significant leagues around Europe, Serie A, their League General Assembly met on Wednesday, and they are waiting for government decisions to be made about the medical protocols that they have come up with. They still have 12 full rounds of games to play, with a few other outstanding from the previous round. But they are allowing teams to train collectively as of this coming Monday. I did mention last week that there was 3 Fiorentina players and some support staff members as well from that club that did test positive for coronavirus, and further to that, a Torino player has also tested positive. So there's not a great deal new from Serie A. There is, however, the thing that I have predicted for quite a while now, that Ligue 1, when they said that they were declaring that wherever teams were at the end of, or where they got to in the league, that is where you finish. And it has transpired that Amiens, who were one of the teams that were relegated because of the calling of that league, they have started legal proceedings for what they call a unjust relegation. Yeah, Paris Saint-Germain, they were awarded the title, which seemed fair enough. They were quite a way ahead in the league, above Olympique Marseille. Yeah, I mean, they were only 19th in the league. They were 4 points behind Nîmes and 10 points ahead of Toulouse, who were bottom, with 10 games to play. So there's a huge argument there that they felt that they could turn things round or something like that. And I predicted this a long while back. I cannot see how they can even allow that to happen. Yeah, the president has said that it just goes against sporting fairness, and I tend to agree with him. I think that this is how it's going to go down. I said in the previous podcast that I think that many of the clubs, and I think that they ended up being 8 Premier League clubs that said that they didn't want to play in neutral grounds. I think they just want reassurances that they are not going to go down on the back of any decisions that are made and how the league is revived. I just don't see how a change in any kind of playing conditions can then lead to teams being relegated in these circumstances. If you're going to promote teams, I think that's fine, but I think it's such big business that you can't possibly allow it, in my opinion, and I can't see how there'd be any kind of legal grounds to dissuade me from otherwise. In other news as well, in the Portuguese league, the team from the Azores, Santa Clara, they're going to be forced to have all of their home games on the Portuguese mainland, because if you enter Portugal, you automatically have a 14-day quarantine, and obviously you can't be doing that with if you're expecting teams to go and travel over there and come back. So that can't happen. But they don't seem to be too bothered with that. The Premier League, that aims to start up again on June 4th. Also the Danish Football League, the Superliga, that's aiming to return on the 28th of May. So the neighbours of Germany, who are starting up this weekend, they're hoping for the weekend following that. And this is kind of breaking news as well. Dele Alli was held at knife point on Wednesday evening in the UK. He was self-isolating at home with family when there was some intruders who struck his face, and I think they have stolen jewellery. This is very much breaking news, and there's not a great deal of detail with it, but Dele Alli was on social media to say thank you for the support that he'd received and that everyone was okay. But that's a scary moment for him. I hope he's okay. In the next section, what we'll talk about is MLS and some interesting developments about how the MLS season might start up, as well as how players might get a pay cut during this time, as well as some transfer news. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. In the previous section, we talked a little bit about how the various different leagues are coping with coronavirus and the precautions that are having to be made. What I'd like to just touch on before the transfer news is how MLS is getting on. So MLS have been in discussion with the Players Association to try and get a 20% pay cut across the board. Now, this is in order for the clubs to remain solvent, I assume. And this is different from 3 weeks ago, where they had the idea of a 50% pay cut, but that only if you were earning over $100,000. Those below that were not affected by it. That has been pitched as an idea. No one at the Players Association has made a comment about this just yet. Both sides were in talks about a collective bargaining agreement before the break for coronavirus. And this was in February. And so due in part to all of that, it's never actually been agreed upon by both sides about what would happen in this situation. The old CBA did contain a force majeure in there, but it was not retained during all of these discussions. So the players have a little bit of leeway there in terms of how they can negotiate a cut in their pay if that is something that they want to do. In terms of actually getting the league back up and running, a way that has been proposed is, it sounds a little bit like when I was a teacher and you would, rather than have one game per week, that you'd have a collection of schools come and meet on the field and have a little bit of a mini tournament. And that's kind of what they're looking to do, with maybe 2 host cities having 2 different tournaments. And yeah, but one of those cities is looking like it might be Orlando should this actually happen. And so it would be like a little group games and then into a knockout stage. Those teams that do not make the knockout stages would then have like what they are going to call consolation games that would make up the right amount of games that they would be ordinarily playing anyway. And they are looking to even have the winner of this competition be the representative in the CONCACAF Champions League, because it's looking less and less likely that the Open Cup is going to happen this year. All the teams would be quarantined, they'd be tested regularly. Yeah, and they're looking for a September start on this thing. So this is very much in the embryonic stage, I believe. Dallas and Kansas City are also in the running to be one of these host cities. That would be really fun if that kind of thing comes off. I'd be certainly into that, I've got to say. In terms of transfer rumours and players moving to various different clubs, it is rumoured that Newcastle, who have just been taken over by new owners, got plenty more money, they're looking at a £53 million offer for Gareth Bale, who his golf handicap has gone way down this season because he's not really been picked all that much. He's 30 years old. It's probably like his last big move at that age. Newcastle, they'll be looking to build a pretty decent squad, so I think that would be a really interesting move for them. Dejan Lovren of Liverpool, who is in and out of the team, depending on whether Gomez or Matip are at centre half. He is looking for a move to Roma. He's still only 30 years old and he's played in a World Cup final, and as he has himself noted, he is the best central defender in the world. Moving on to Manchester United, this has been mooted for quite a while now, that they reckon that Jadon Sancho of Borussia Dortmund, Jack Grealish of Aston Villa, and this new young kid Jude Bellingham from Birmingham City, they're all going to United during the summer. Birmingham, who I think financially could benefit from a big sale of a 16-year-old. I've seen clips of this kid, and he reminds me very much of a young Paul Ince, where he's a goal threat, but also he's just box to box, which is a really unusual. You don't really get that type of midfielder these days. So he looks a prospect, and I think if United were to get that trio of players, I think they would go that extra level, I've got to say. Barcelona are interested in Tottenham and Argentina defender Juan Foyth. I don't really see that, I've got to say myself. Don't really rate him. Maybe the Premier League is too quick for him, but he looks very unreliable in my opinion. But maybe Barcelona can make a player out of him, I don't know. It's also said that Ozil will stay next year and he'll run out the remaining year of his contract there. And I think this is going to be the case for many players that, given the circumstances right now, that they don't really fancy a move away in these uncertain times. Ozil's 31, and I suspect that there'll be people coming in for him, especially if he is a free transfer this time next year. Chelsea and Manchester United rather, they're after Moussa Dembele from Lyon, the striker from there. He's only 23. They're looking for maybe £60 million for him. This is an interesting one for me. At 30 years old, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Arsenal's striker, I can see him going. I don't see Arsenal improving enough for him to hang around much longer, I have to say. He is absolute class, that fella, and Arsenal have relied on him too much. He's getting too little out of the amount of effort he's putting in my opinion. He's kind of getting out there that maybe he'd fancy a move to Real Madrid, and honestly I think that would be a brilliant move for him. Yeah, last couple of things. A player I really rate highly, Declan Rice. He's at West Ham right now. I think he would slot into most midfield, certainly in the Premier League, and maybe lots of places in Europe too. I think Real Madrid are looking to at N'Golo Kante, so maybe if that doesn't go through, then he would pick up Declan Rice. But also I think Chelsea are in the market for him too. I think he could be anything he wants to be, that lad. He puts himself about, he can tackle, he can pass, got a goal in him. I really rate him very highly, I've got to say. Although he's not had an absolutely outstanding season this time round, and I think it's still brilliant. And the Chinese team that Igalo is on loan from to United right now, they expect him back. So Shanghai Shenhua, they want him back before the start of the season. No arguments, apparently, regardless of where United are at with their season. We'll call it a day there. In the final part of the show, I'm going to have the next instalment of the section I'm calling Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. And in this podcast, what we're going to focus on is the Hand of God game, and also the 1950 World Cup game between England and the USA. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. This is the final section of the podcast. In the previous section, we had a look at how the MLS might go about restarting the season, as well as some of the transfer speculation that might happen once the seasons have been completed. In this final section, we are going to be looking at just a continuation of the section that I started last week. I'm calling it Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. A look at some of the more significant happenings of the sport that we love around the world and in its history. And this week, I want to focus on the 1986 World Cup quarter-final between Argentina and England. It's famous for two incredible incidents, one of which is referred to as the Hand of God. And it is referred to by the person that actually perpetrated, is that the right word? From an English perspective, probably, Diego Maradona. There's a lot of history surrounding this game in particular, because in 1982, Argentina and Britain had fought in what was called the Falklands War. This was a British territory just off the coast of Argentina. It had long been disputed with Argentina, and they had claimed their rights over it. War was declared, 255 British lives were lost, 649 Argentinian lives were lost, with many more wounded. This is the backdrop of the 1986 World Cup game. In the World Cup, Argentina had just beaten Uruguay 1-0 in the round of 16. England had beaten Paraguay 3-0 in the previous round, and so they met each other in the quarterfinals. The actual first half was pretty tight, and then early in the second half, with it still 0-0, there's a deflected pass that comes off Steve Hodge of England, and it loops up towards the edge of the penalty area, and both Peter Shilton, the England goalkeeper, and Diego Maradona are both going for it. There's a sort of coming together. It ends up in the back of the net. I remember distinctly that the commentator at the time does not call it as being handball, and that it's very, very well done how he does it. He kind of leads with his arm, but also with his head, and at the time, it wasn't picked up on. The referee at the time was actually spoken to many years after the incident, and he had been told that if a linesman had a better view of it, that person should make the decision. But then when the linesman was interviewed, he said that he didn't really want to get involved because it was so obvious that it had been a handball that he didn't think that it was any of his business to not give it, sort of thing. So, an incredible moment. Obviously, England complained to the referee, the handball there, that the goal was given, Argentina 1-0 up. Then a few months later, the goal of the century is scored. To do what Diego Maradona does on that field takes some doing. Apparently it was an absolute minefield, cutting up, really awful for first touches, and he runs about 60 yards with the ball. He beats about 4 men, I think probably 3 of them twice. It's just an incredible goal. He then chips it over Shilton to score one of the great goals of all time. Argentina 2-0 up, cruising into the quarters. As an England fan, I've got to say that it ended up being 2-1 with Barnes coming on. He set up 2 really good chances, one of which Lineker scored from. I remember as a kid growing up, I would have been 9 at that point. I remember the absolute injustice of it all. I couldn't believe it. It's actually, England didn't really deserve to get anything from that game. Didn't play very well at all. And Argentina went on to win the whole thing, beating Germany in the final. The significance of that, of course, is that Diego Maradona became this absolute pangalactic megastar. The World Cups in that era were your only chance really to see world players, and so he became an absolute superstar, that just on a world scale. The other moment in soccer that I'd like to touch on is what is called the Miracle on Grass. This is the game between the USA and England in the 1950 World Cup. It's held in Brazil. In the group stages, England were drawn with Chile, Spain, and the USA. In the first game, England beat Chile 2-0. The USA were the next game. But the USA were basically made up of part-timers or amateurs, were absolutely expected to get thumped off the field. And in fact, the coach, Bill Jeffrey at the time, summed up in what you'd probably call a pre-game press conference that we have no chance. We are sheep ready to be slaughtered. So he'd give his own team too much of a chance. And England were highly fancied. Walter Winterbottom, the England manager at the time, was expected to absolutely blow this lot apart. Guess what? Didn't happen. The game was played in Belo Horizonte in front of 10,000 or more spectators. Although England dominated the early parts of the game, it was a deflected shot that went in off a Haitian dishwasher. His name was Joe Gaetjens, and the crowd went absolutely bananas. Apparently England were all over them after that, but they held on to their 1-0 win. Legend has it that when the game was reported upon and message was received from Brazil that England had lost 1-0, they thought that was either a misprint or that it was 10-0 to England rather than 1-0 to the USA, or they just could not believe that USA had beaten 1-0. In fact, the Birmingham Gazette called it a black day for England. It was a day of introspection for England, who then went away and tried to come up with better plans, but it was also a really significant day for the US. Just an unbelievable shock result. Thank you again for spending this time with the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Really, really means a lot. I'm going to be back on Monday with a look at how it all went in Germany, and hopefully it all went off safely. Look forward to reviewing those games over the weekend. If you can, give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We are at GSMC_soccer. Really appreciate it if you could to get involved in that. If you could give us a review as well about this podcast. We want to get your feedback, and hopefully we can get this better and make this better, and your feedback will help us do that. If you have any thoughts about any of the topics that we've covered, if you are looking to follow a new German team this weekend, really love to hear about that. That would be awesome. And any other significant moments in soccer that you want us to cover as well. All right. Until then, thanks again, and please stay safe.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.